Alright, hey guys, so I wanted to put a video together to show you how I do my retouching and I guess editing in general. I'm gonna kind of fast forward through the editing part. I'm just gonna use a preset or something, and then really focus on the retouching in Photoshop. And then I guess I'll talk about why I'm doing certain things, what my thought process is going through it. So here we have a photo that was from an editorial that I shot a couple weeks ago. It's didn't make the final cut, so we're just going to use it for this demonstration. So first let me just add a profile to it. I tend to not use presets exactly. You'll see that sometimes I use presets like toolkit presets that just have like different levels of grain or fade or something like that. It makes the workflow pretty quick. But what we're going to do is we're going to slap a like a film profile on it. So let's try one of these. Okay, this V4 is pretty close to something I might like, so I think we just need to bring the exposure up a little bit. Probably the highlights down. One thing I am noticing in this photo, before we even get to the retouching, is I think the sky's a little too saturated, so... There we go. This is a pretty good place to start from. So we have our before and our after, just kind of pump up the tones a little bit here. Alright, so the way that I get my photos into Photoshop is a little bit different than I used to do it before. So before, I used to just come over here and use edit in Adobe Photoshop. Now since I'm using a profile, I found that it doesn't work the way that I would want it to. So I want this exact edit in Photoshop when I'm working on it, right? I don't want to edit the original file, and I don't want to edit the original file with just these settings. I want to edit the original file with a profile applied and all the adjustments that I've made. So what I've done is make a little export preset called Edit in Photoshop. What I like to do is I put it in a subfolder called TIFF. We're going to export as a TIFF file. That's down here. No compression, bit depth 16, I want the most detail as I can. Color space, RGB is fine. We'll keep all our metadata, etc. And then down here, this is important, open in Adobe Photoshop 2021. I save that as a user preset, so that way I can actually, instead of going through that panel every single time, right click here and then go to export and then use my edit in Photoshop preset. So we'll click on that. We just gotta wait for it to export and load Photoshop. Photoshop's loading on the other screen here, so I'm gonna drag it over in a minute. Okay, here it goes. Alright, so now we're in Photoshop, and you notice that up here we are using a TIFF file. So this is our edited file in TIFF. The reason I like to use TIFF is because it does retain a lot of information, a lot more than JPEG. But keep in mind, the files are pretty big. So if you're low on space on your machine, you might want to consider freeing up some space before you start editing TIFF files. Alright, so let's jump in here to the face. So my process is usually to do things in two phases. The first phase is what I call the cleanup phase, and then the second phase would be frequency separation, which is the method that I use to retouch skin. So first we're gonna duplicate our background layer, and then I like to name this cleanup. So in the cleanup, I usually do a couple of things. The first thing I might do is zoom all the way out from the photo, just to look at the whole photo and see if there's anything in this photo that's just overly distracting. And in this particular case, there really isn't. I do see this up here, which I think is something that's in the sky that's like really distant behind the model, so it's kind of bokeh out a little bit. That looks a little weird. Because you can't tell what it is. Like if the model was over to the right, to the left a little bit more, and you could see this structure actually coming out from the background, it might make a little more sense. But here it just kind of looks like this, like, orb floating behind our model. So it's actually in a pretty tough location because it's so close to her head. But we'll see if we can do something about that. I might actually circle back around to that towards the end. But for now, another thing that I would take a look out for in the cleanup phase is actually hair that I don't want in the photo. So there's two different ways that I clean up hair. If it's hair that's like this in the background of when the backdrop is just the sky, like a nice gradient, it's actually really easy to just use the clone stamp tool. So let's use that. So all I'm going to do is just sample something pretty similar. Now you can see there's like a little bit of a gradient in the sky here. So I don't want to sample up here and then start painting down here. I want to keep it pretty close. So it might mean that we have to make a couple of brush strokes. But that's okay. Really quickly, I'm just using a regular circle brush, but with my hardness all the way down. Kind of blends a little easier at the edges. Sometimes I'll bring that hardness all the way back up if I'm trying to make like a hard line on something. You don't really want like a blurry haze of hair around your model. So just keep that in mind when you're going. You can actually see right here in this particular area where I just was, that it lightened up the back of her head a little bit. So this is where I'm going to take the hardness down. Or hardness back up, I should say. You know, let's see if we can get rid of this guy. Pretty close. So I'm just zooming in and out to see what it looks like from a distance. Up close, it's pretty easy to see all your errors. But far away, it's a little more ambiguous. So I'm constantly zooming in and out to check to see how things are looking. I think this might be okay. Another way to kind of clean this up a little bit too would actually be to clone her hair and then paste it somewhere else. So that looks pretty convincing to me for now anyways. I tend to do another cleanup step at the very end. I try not to get too hung up right in the beginning. I just kind of want to see where the image is going from the beginning. So that's the first cleanup phase. Then we'll do frequency separation, get the skin all nice, and then we'll step back again and kind of see, okay, is there anything else that I missed? Is there more pieces of hair that I want to remove? Are there more items in the background that I want to change, etc., etc.? And then we can actually continue repeating those steps as many times as we want. But typically it's just those three. It's just initial cleanup, frequency separation, second cleanup. Sometimes we might do a liquefy somewhere in the middle, but I don't think we're going to need it on this one. So whenever you have pieces like this, like that are just coming off of skin, you have to get right up against the skin to fix this. So this is a good example of a spot that I might come back later and clean all the hair off the ear. What I'm really trying to do here is kind of decide which pieces of hair I want to keep and which ones I want to get rid of. And then you kind of just trace them. So that looks pretty okay to me for now. Alright, so let's get to the second part, which is frequency separation. You know, actually, before I do that, let me, I want to show you guys one more thing. Now, let's say we have, so these are hair this is obviously hair that's just on like a plain background, right? But we also have hair coming across the face. I use a different tool to remove those. I use the healing brush. Now, my determining factor of what I'm going to remove is to try and figure out what is distracting. What's distracting away from the model? And then it's kind of the theme of this entire edit, or my editing process in general, is what's distracting. So I think over here is a little busy. I don't want it to look like there's no wind. Obviously the wind's blowing in this photo. But we have a couple of strays that just seem like they're a little out of place on the model. So let's go ahead and remove those. So just like with the clone tool, I'm going to sample an area that's close by and then paint that on. You can see that my diffusion's really low. My hardness, again, is going to be pretty much at 0, or if not at 100% 0. So let's start removing things. So sample and then paint. And you can also do this for lines in the face at this step as well. It's pretty simple. One thing that you want to pay attention to are like what are actually features of the model's face, and then what are just like blemishes of the day or makeup that wasn't applied correctly. If the model has like a freckle or something like that, I don't want to remove those. That's the model's face, right? But not everyone has the same pimple in the same spot every day, right? So we can take those away. Some people do go really far with just making the model look not human. That's just not my style. I try to keep things appearing realistic if I can. So there's a couple more over here. Now, when you're using the this healing brush, oh, that was a little too much, too aggressive. When you're using the healing brush, you want to avoid edges. The healing brush tends to kind of like blend images, like really blend edges really strangely. I'll show you an example. So if we were to come over here and sample this, we start getting these weird effects. We don't ever want that. So again, we're trying to keep everything looking as natural as possible. So sometimes I'll do edges in 2 steps, so I might do that there and then jump on the other side of it. This is going to be really tough to remove. I'm okay with leaving that there. There are sometimes you're going to have to realize, like, it's just the photo. Right? Not everything you want to fix in post. You can. I could spend a whole bunch of time on doing something like that, but I'm going to avoid it. 1, for the sake of this demonstration, so it's not hours long. But 2, there's just some times that, hey, you know what? You might want to jump back into your selects folder and see if you have a photo that's better, where some of those things are fixed. And you want to keep certain things in mind when you're shooting. I actually find that I shoot a lot better now that I've been retouching my own photos for a while, because I'll catch things that I may not have caught before, because I know that I'm going to have to retouch that in post, and I don't want to spend all this time in post fixing something that I could have just fixed right then and there on the shoot, by like asking the model to pull some of the flyaways from her hair or something like that. I think we're in a pretty good spot right now. Let's check before and after. So this is before our cleanup. That's after our cleanup. Doing this is actually a pretty good way for me anyways to see what else is distracting. Sometimes you pull away a bunch of elements that were initially distracting, and then other things now stick out as distracting because you've removed something that was really distracting, right? So I think what I'm gonna do, I'm starting to not like this hair that's going across the face. So I don't want to bring it to the edge, but at least I'm going to probably just shorten it, maybe bring it over here with the rest of the hair that's coming across the face. So let's just do this really quickly. That's not bad. That's not as distracting. I probably do want to take the hair out of her lip though. I think this is pretty nice so far. Might want to push this back just a little more. And you might see that sometimes I have in mind, right, too, that I want to get rid of this. Let's say, for example. But I'm going to need a spot to heal from. Like, I'm going to need a clean spot. So sometimes I might have to clean up an area near it first in order to have something, have a spot where I can actually pull from. So I'm doing the task of just cleaning up around here so that eventually I can do something like that, right? And I think that looks pretty nice. I think this is a good place to move on from. How are we doing on time? We're doing pretty okay. Okay, so the next step is frequency separation. So in order to do frequency separation, I guess you probably want to understand what it means, or conceptually what it is, what we're doing. The goal of frequency separation is to separate the frequency. So what we're trying to do is remove all of the texture that's in the image, particularly from our model's face. We want to separate that from the colors and tones underneath of the texture. That way we can shape the shadows on our model's face without making her skin look like not skin, right? And then after we do that, we can repair parts of the skin texture that need to be addressed if we want to. Both of these steps, you have to be really subtle, and it's best to err on the side of caution without going too far. If you go too far, all of a sudden your model looks like Woody from Toy Story, and we don't want that again. We want something that looks pretty natural. So to do this manually, what you want to do is whatever your current layer that you want to work on is, we're gonna clone that twice. So what I'm doing is I'm hitting Command J twice, and I'm going to name the middle one LF for low frequency, and I'm going to name this one HF for high frequency. What we're going to do is we're going to make our low frequency just the color and tones and shadows, and our high frequency will be the texture. So what we have to do is come over to our filters on our low frequency, and you saw that I hid our high frequency so that I can see this effect that I'm about to do, which is a Gaussian blur. Okay, so you want to set your radius to a number that allows it so when you look at your image, you can't see any texture. All blemishes should be gone. You don't want to go too high, you don't want to go too low. I think for this one, 12 is probably going to look pretty nice. This looks good to me. Let me just double check to see what 10 looks like. You know what? I'm going to stick with 10 actually. So let's go with 10. Okay. So this is our image, and then this is the blurred version of it. Now what we want to do is take our original image and subtract the blur from it. Right? So we have our original image, which if you think of it as texture and color, and we have our blurred version, which is just the color and shadows. We're going to subtract the color and shadows from our original image, which should just leave us the texture. So I'm going to turn this on. We come over to image, apply image. We want our layer to be the low frequency layer. We want our blending to be subtract. And then our scale needs to be 2, our offset 128, and opacity 100%. It's set that way for me already because I do this often, but when it's your first time, you'll probably have to put those values in manually. So let's hit OK. So now you can see we have our texture, and then if I hide our texture layer, we have our colors and tones. So the next step is we want to be able to work on these separately and then put them back together at the end, right? So in order for us to be able to see these two things added together to make our final image, we're going to change the blending on our texture layer to linear light. So now you're seeing through the texture layer as linear light, and the color shadow layer underneath of it add up to make our regular image. So now we can work on these separately. Now, I like to start with this layer here. when I am working on it, what I like to do is Command J, make a copy of it, and then using Command, I can click on, holding it down the, sorry, not Command, Alt on Windows. I can hold down the Alt key and click in the middle area between these two layers. Now they're linked. So for example, if I were to shut this one off, it shuts off both of them. And we get this hideous effect because we're adding more texture to our previous image. So we're going to keep this on here. The reason I'm making a copy is so that, of course, if I mess up, I can just delete this one and then copy it again. Sometimes if I'm doing a lot of tweaking, about halfway through, I'll just copy it again. That way I have like a save point, essentially, in my workflow. Because remember, when we're doing frequency separation, this is completely destructive. So there's no going back. We're manipulating the actual pixels in the photo. Okay, so in order to work on this layer better, what I like to do is hide this and just actually make edits to the blurred photo. Now, my tool of choice for this is, once again, the healing brush tool. I like the healing brush tool to be fairly large, depending on the section that I'm working on. And we definitely want to make sure that our hardness is as low as possible and that our diffusion is low again here too. We don't need that. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm going to sample something and then paste it really close to that sample. We're going to do this a lot of times, and we're going to do this technique in order to create smoother transitions from the colors and shadows on this layer. So we might not see too much going on in the cheek area here because it's actually really nice. We want to be careful so that we don't do things like mess up the makeup. But when we get to the forehead, you'll see in this area there are some harsher transitions between the light and the shadows. So we'll actually probably see the biggest difference up here. But I tend to start around the cheek area, so let's do that now. So again, it's just a lot of clicking. And I think eventually this feels weird. It felt weird the first time I did it. But you start to kind of get a feel for what you're looking for. Notable areas are the shadows and highlights in the corners of the mouth and by the area of the nose. Same as well with the chin. You don't want to completely remove shadows and highlights. You don't want the model to be flat, right? Like, as we are making changes here, we are essentially shaping the shadows on her face, which has the effect of shaping the face. So we don't want to do anything that's going to be too unnatural. Now I can come over here and see before and after, and you can already kind of see this is our before, this is our after. Our transitions are smoother now. That kind of subtle difference is what we're looking for. And let's come up here now. So this is just sample, paint, sample, paint, sample, paint, sample, paint. Sometimes areas where there's heavy transition, like there's obviously a sun highlight here, and then it goes when we're wrapping around the corner of the face, the transition is pretty drastic. So we want to be careful not to flatten this area out. Whoa. Not to flatten this area out too much. But now let's take a look at before and after. So we've kind of smoothed out all those little shadows that you may not have even noticed at first. But once we smooth that out, you can see a pretty big difference. So now I'm starting to like the way this looks. I think there might be a little bit of work we can do on the left cheek. And then a little bit over here. There's a highlight right here. I'm not sure if I like it. So I think I'm gonna get rid of it. Okay, so before, after. Alright, so now let's put the skin texture back on. And then now we can see the before and after with the skin texture back on. So this was before, and that's after. So we haven't done anything to the skin yet, aside from our cleanup phase, which of course definitely did replicate some skin features in a really small way, right? So now, I'm pretty happy with the low frequency, so now let's work on the high frequency. Again, I'm going to copy this layer, and we're gonna get a weird effect here, so bear with me. We're gonna copy this layer. We're gonna clip it down. And you notice that this got this like over sharpened. It looks like we set clarity to 1000. What we wanna do is just change this to normal. So our original high frequency layer is still linear light, and our pinned copy is going to be just normal. Now we can work on this. When I'm working on this layer, I don't like to use the healing brush tool. I actually like to use the patch tool. The healing brush tool does a really good job at blending things, but in this particular case I actually don't really want to blend stuff as much. What I want to do is kind of find an area of the skin that I think looks nice, and then kind of replicate that in other areas. I don't want to overdo it, so this is kind of just due to taste, I guess. If I took the cleanest area of skin and then repeated it everywhere, our model's gonna look completely fake, because no one looks like that. This is also a good time to remove some lines. And what I'm looking for are just areas that could be maybe smoother. This would be a good time to address any acne or anything like that, scarring, if that's something that you want to remove. I don't think I really need to do much here. Again, guys, this is to taste, so I might move something and you might say, hey, you know what? I wouldn't have done that. That's just a normal feature on the model's face. Or you might be looking somewhere else and saying like, hey dude, there's a glaring blemish right there and you need to fix that. Just use your best judgment. Let's see. I think we're looking really good. I might, let's try something here. Let's just grab this and move it over. So sometimes with this tool you can actually grab an entire section, move it. It does a pretty good job at blending and keeping things looking natural still. I actually like the way that came out. Let's try the same thing here. Great. Okay, so this is before and after. So you can see we didn't do much, but what we're doing is making a difference. This would be really important on like a studio headshot or something like that. Okay. I think I see kind of like right here. I look from far away. All right, I think this looks pretty good. So one thing that I like to do is go back to our layers and grab all of the frequency separation layers and group them up. And we're gonna name it FS for frequency separation. Then I like to duplicate that whole thing and merge the group. So now we've taken all of our frequency separation and just made it into one layer of pixels. We've kind of finalized it. And then on this layer is where we can do our second cleanup. We can do our liquefy if we want. So let's call this liquefy. And this might be where I, if there were anything, there really isn't. I think this looks great. So now let's save the file. I like to save it with the layers. This keeps your file size pretty good, like a pretty good size, like it's gonna be pretty big still. But if I need to come back in and make changes later to any of the previous layers, I still have all of that. Once you're done with this process entirely, you can go back and delete all of these things later. So let's save this. We'll wait for this to get to 100%. Okay. So now let's check back into Lightroom. I might need to change my catalog settings here. So we can go to all photographs. And where was that file we were just working on? Okay, here's our TIFF. I like to color code these things to keep track of them. So blue is usually the Lightroom file, the raw file that I'm applying Lightroom changes to. And then green for me is the Photoshop file. So let's jump into here. Here we go. Here's all of our changes. Let's go to like 50%. So this is, let this load. This is going to be our before. And that's our after. Much cleaner. Now we can do our final step. So I still will edit this file after the fact. Typically what I'm just doing here is maybe adding some grain. I like to add grain to my photos. If it's important, if you're going to add grain to your photos, add them after you edit them in Photoshop. You don't want to be moving around grain or dealing with grain when you're in the frequency separation process. So here we go. Let's highlight both of these. Go to our library. We can look at both of them. This is our before, and that's our after. Actually, I can show you the true before, right? So this is before any edits at all. And then this is after with the retouching. Looking at this now, I actually am starting to notice this hair. I'm starting to feel like it's pretty distracting. So that's great. So what we would do is you would just come back in here. And this is why we, like I said before, we can have multiple cleanup phases. We would enter into another cleanup phase, take that out, hit save, and then what Lightroom's going to do is just update the file that's underneath of this grain edit that we're doing here. Yeah. Oop. Sometimes I get confused which program I'm in for zooming. And that's it. All right. I hope that was helpful. See ya.